Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Building Leaders at Every Level, sponsored by Lone Rock Leadership, Tenor, InfoPro Learning, Hemsley Fraser, and CLS. I'm Emma, a marketing associate here at Training Industry, and I'm so excited to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat for comments and submit questions by clicking on the Q&A icon in your Zoom toolbar. All the questions will be addressed during the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. Once this session ends, a brief survey will pop open in your browser, so please take a moment to share feedback on the sessions and the speaker. And as always, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections amongst learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, our podcast, and more. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms so we can continue the conversation. And now, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers from Hemsley Fraser, Abby Patterson, Solutions Architect, and Ian Klein, SVP of Strategic Accounts. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you to Training Industry, and thank you to everyone who's joined. We're from Hemsley Fraser, which is a training industry top 20 company for leadership development, for online learning library, and training services for many years now. We're very thrilled to be here today to talk about human first leadership and the way that the capabilities that are really needed for organizations and teams to thrive have been changing over the past couple of years. Before I introduce myself, much more important would be to introduce Abby Patterson, one of our solution architects. Abby, say hello.
Hello and good afternoon to everybody in the States who's joined us today. It's great to be here to talk about some of our insights and to share some of our experiences of working with clients globally and talk about some of the trends that we're seeing show up when we're having these client conversations.
And would you give us a little bit about your background?
So I'm a solution architect. And what does that mean at Hemsley? So I work with and listen to many of our global clients to understand what it is they're trying to change or improve within their business, and then devise solutions that are going to help them make those improvements and realize those changes. Quite often that's building learning and development programs or interventions of some kind to help drive those changes and see the behavioral shifts that they're looking for. I've been at Hemsley for about 3.5 years, and I've been in the industry for many more decades. That's me, and that's why I'm here today. I'm pleased to share some of these insights, and passing over to you, Ian. You head up the side of the business that works in the States, and we often talk about some of our insights and how they connect and resonate, and also how they differ.
Yes, thanks, Abby. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm Ian Klein. I'm located about 1.5 miles from where the ball drops in Times Square, New York City. We have a very, very similar role, although our geographies are very different. Abby living in the UK. But I'd say something, so the only thing I'd say that differentiates me is for many decades, I was on the L&D side and rose to become VP of a global corporate and learning and development organization. So where you all sit, both Abby and I have sat before, and we really do understand the pressures that you're facing, the things you need to try to get off the ground and run to help your organizations be successful. And I really enjoy exactly what Abby does too, which is working with large global complex organizations to figure out what is the real problem that can be solved and how can we use learning to help solve those problems and improve performance. So Abby, why don't you get started then with our webinar here? And I think you've got it all set up. I can see this slide. I think everyone's ready to go.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian. And so part of my role is, yeah, to listen to clients, but I also work really closely with our associate network and some of our research specialists to surface some of the trends that we're seeing and to understand, what they're really meaning in terms of how they show up day to day and how we can provide our solutions. And so I suppose the big question is, why do leadership capabilities need to shift? And I don't know if it's the same for you, Ian. I'm predicting it might be, but there's quite a lot of uncertainty and change all around us. And that definitely shows up in the client conversations that we're having in terms of some of the things that people are struggling with day to day. Does that resonate with you and the conversations that you have with your clients?
It does. I'd agree. I'd say that um, for the past decade or so, there has been a feeling of continuous change. And as we've all seen, the World Economic Forum's top 10 capabilities does change with time. I think what we've seen in the last couple of years, though, for any number of reasons, technological improvement and development, political conflict and evolutions, has compressed that. So the change in the capabilities we need to succeed, that change has accelerated dramatically. So we've always seen the change, but now the pace of change has gone absolutely bonkers.
Absolutely. Thicker and faster, I think, is definitely what we see and
Yeah.
many of the leaders that we speak to are experiencing. I remember seeing a slide from Microsoft, and this was going back a couple of years ago now, just in terms of the evolution of change. And it was quite a gradual curve. And then it got to kind of the last 10 years, and it was just constant ticking up in terms of the prevalence of constant change. But I think in the last couple of years, or even in the last 12 months, we're experiencing that even more. And the quote there by the World Economic Forum is predicting exactly the same for the skills landscape. Not only will it continue to change rapidly, but it will probably do so at a pace that we haven't seen before. And so the skills that we need are maybe also just about being able to deal with some of the pace of change and that level of uncertainty that all of these different things are bringing. And in terms of what we're experiencing, technological evolvements, the constant economic uncertainty that we're having to make decisions around, or that leaders are having to make decisions within, and then also that transition to maybe a greener future, all means that we're having to make faster, quicker decisions, quite often without the clarity or the foresight that we may have had before. And there's a couple of kind of key insights that I think are quite good to tease out from the some of the stats in the latest report, and that is around the predicted core skills that are required for 2030. And 5 out of those 8 core skills are actually human centric. And they're all linked to they're all linked to how we show up as a human being, how we feel and interact with other people and we relate to other people, how we make our decisions, but also how we develop ourselves and other people around us. And one of those key core skills that they're focusing on in terms of a growth of importance is around leadership and social influence. And to me, that makes quite a lot of sense, because if we think about what's happening in the world in terms of the increased complexity, the pace of change being faster, the scale of which we're changing things, those decisions become thicker and faster. And it's really that the need for that leadership responsibility to be human, because to stand behind those decisions that you're making, you need to be accountable, and it will be a human that is fundamentally accountable for making the decisions going forward. You might be informed by insights and tech coming from different angles, but it will always be the human that stands accountable to the decisions that are being made.
So, Abby, I wonder, so we've read the research, we have our own viewpoint. I'd be very interested in seeing what the attendees on this webinar have to say. So why don't we move on to our next slide, which is a poll question. And we're asking, what's your biggest leadership priority for the next 12 to 18 months regarding leadership and regarding those human skills? Is it management basics, preparing for AI and change, leading complex teams better, creating cultures where people have psychological safety, or holding on to talent and helping people grow. We're going to give it a minute or two here, but it's always interesting when we do the polls to see how the research stacks up with the reality for our practitioners here. And I'm seeing something very interesting, Abby. I'm assuming you're seeing, well, you're seeing the same thing, but I am not surprised. But when it comes down to what L&D practitioners are really focused on, it is that attract, grow, and retain more than 50% of the people on this webinar. That's the biggest leadership priority for the next 12 to 18 months. What do you say to that?
I think that's great to see. You know, we are in the business of developing and helping people, so it's good to see that that is where our focus is going forward. And I can see the fluctuations in terms of some of those responses, you know, that have come in. You know, people starting with, we need to get the management basics right, absolutely, but we also need to help people grow and deal with the pace of change. So that it feels like these two things continuously need to be developed in at the same pace.
Well, I'll just add to that here. I like the way that answer is phrased, holding on to talent. A lot of times we think as L&D practitioners, our job is to create core skills and develop. Of course it is. But another reason many organizations look to L&D is we, L&D, are one of the main things, the opportunities we provide are what keeps people at one organization rather than leaving for a competitor. And we become part of the value proposition L&D of working at a particular organization. I think a lot of people are feeling that right now.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think when I was reading something earlier on today around, you know, how some of the statistics are showing up about why people are choosing to leave current organizations and making decisions to go, quite often it is around their potential for career development, which is influencing their decisions. And that's in a market where we've got the least amount of opportunities since about April 2020. So people are still making decisions to leave, but quite often with different driving forces behind them than maybe they have been in the last 4 years. So interesting. So what can
Abby,
we do about that?
I'm a big fan of diagrams and roadmaps and frameworks. So I see we have one on the screen. So please talk us through this.
Yeah, and so we're talking about what are the new expectations for leaders and what do the new capabilities need to be, but equally leaning into that response that we've just had from the poll. You know, how do we develop people in the right way going forward to be successful in this sort of climate of economic uncertainty and constant change? Well, in 2023, so back sort of 3 years ago, we developed the Hemsley Fraser's point of view around leadership and management. So it was our framework and our point of view, which collected insights from working in the space for 30 years, insights from working with, you know, global businesses, what our professionals and specialists were telling us, but also what the latest research and academic sources were citing. And we built our model around that. So in the center, I'm not going to go into loads of detail, but for everybody's reference, in the center of the model, we've located managers and leaders because we believe every manager needs to lead and every leader needs to be able to manage. We then have 3 pillars around the triangle, which are aligned to me, myself. How do I lead as a leader? How do I develop the teams and people around me? And how do I drive that organization forward? And then in the outer part of the model, we constructed 10 capabilities, which loosely connected to the themes of me, we, and org in terms of where they're placed. So again, it was looking at the research from, from business schools and consultancies and professional bodies. So that's what we did back in 2023. And we've done it again in 2026 to kind of sense check where we are and think, is what we thought was important back in 2023, is that still the same? And we've got an evolving point of view, and we're bringing that to the conversation today. So this is evolving, it's not set in stone, and we really like people's insights as well. So what we're going to do over the session is just review what the original capabilities were and then discuss where they've shifted to. And I talk about capabilities. because I'm aware that quite often people talk about skills or people might talk about competencies. But at Hemsley, we have a viewpoint that capability is literally the combination of somebody's ability and their capacity to practice and refine that ability. So hence why we focused on capabilities, because we think people need the space to, build the ability and the capacity to practice it, to be able to develop that confidence and become successful. So if we liken that to maybe driving a car, you might have the ability to do it, but it's only with that practice and repetition that you actually become capable, and you're able to pass the test and drive the car successfully. And hopefully we'll get better with that over time. I say that as a mother of teenagers.
And you're talking to someone who hasn't driven a car, because I live in New York City in many years, so maybe not the best example for me.
Maybe not, but hopefully you can understand the sentiment.
I do.
So when we are looking at the capabilities which are linked to myself as a leader, we can see along the top there, we've got what we had down originally. So we had leading inclusively and being authentic. And we've shifted that towards leading authentically with emotional intelligence. We've had change readiness, so being ready for change. And now we're moving towards how do we navigate constant change as a leader? We had developing or creating purposeful agile plans for myself, my own development, for my team, and for the organization. And now we're looking at something that's, got a focus around how do I build AI and digital fluency?
Before we move forward, Abby, just one note. So if you remember on the last page, it said me, we, and org. The me on the previous page is now self capabilities, but it's that same me. How do I show up as a leader in the most effective ways?
Absolutely. And I think it's in this space, so in that bucket of capabilities, that we're seeing the biggest change. And so again, from being authentic to leading authentically with emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is showing up constantly in the research. It's showing up a lot in conversations with clients. It's really being pointed out as the game changer or the differentiator for a successful leader. And that's really because if we think about the climate that people are working within, that uncertainty, dealing with constant change, you need to have a good understanding of who you are. You need to be able to ground yourself, and you need to be able to understand your own emotional states and that of those around you. That's essential if you want to be able to foster that inclusion and the belonging with the people around you, so that you get people to want to be able to follow you as a leader. You want them to listen to you and you want them to work with you. And I think we can see that in the concept of a story. Now, I'm not going to say whether or not this was a real life story, but imagine this. Two leaders, both very capable and technically good at their jobs, senior leaders, go into the same board meeting. Both of them come out, have a completely different emotional response with their teams. One unleashes their, unguarded emotional response to those around them, talking about chaos, talking about, it's the end, telling everyone to man their lifeboats, while the other leader is able to, understand and reflect upon the experience, manage their own emotional response, stay curious, lean in, and then take the time to be able to communicate with their team in a way that fosters, confidence and gives them clarity about a potential way forward. Now, in that environment, you've got two different leaders operating very differently, one with the emotional intelligence and one without. And you will get very different responses from that situation. Again, I'm not going to say whether it was right or wrong, but one team did cease to exist quite quickly, and the other team led into the change, led into the turmoil, and built their capabilities to be able to deal with what was ahead.
Abby, an excellent comment in the chat. It could wait till later, but I'm just really intrigued by it. So Emma, and thank you for joining, Emma, says she loves this combination and visual of me, we, and org. How do you help communicate the importance of the me and the we to senior leaders who maybe are more focused on the org part? This is where I see the most tension currently. And we've experienced this. We've all experienced this in leadership programs and interventions where you have very tenured, very senior executives who are really at the top of their game might not be the best on those leading authentically, communicating effectively, providing psychological safety, but you can't really go to them and say, we know you're the head of a function in a global organization, but you can't give feedback and your people aren't motivated. What can we do to engage them in the fact that all three buckets, the me, the we, and the org, are important to their practice?
I think we need to be quite clear in terms of understanding the context and maybe being able to tell the story around how that might be experienced by other people. So I think it's always thinking about how different people receive messages. So we might use a completely abstract concept to be able to teach how they and to demonstrate how one person might interpret a message very differently to another person. So it's really about trying to demonstrate and elevate that through other means. And in those contexts where maybe people don't have that emotional intelligence or self-awareness, it's often easier to start that in when we're explaining abstract stories, so not related to them personally, but related to a different situation. So if we start by thinking about something that's, I don't know, abstract, conceptual, futuristic, they can maybe understand it in those contexts as opposed to thinking about themselves first. So we need to build an activity or a situation or a simulation that gets them to understand that experience before we get them to reflect on themselves. Because if they've not developed that rigor in terms of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, starting with them reflecting on themselves, it's often a barrier because they're not able to get to that point quickly.
Excellent. Thank you.
So moving on to the next capability then, in terms of which we're seeing a big change, there's no shock here, I'm sure, for anyone, but digital and AI fluency is obviously it's going to be a baseline going forward. Now there hasn't always been, I mean, digital transformation, growth mindset, innovation, these have been things which have shown up in many leadership programs to some extent in recent years. But I think there needs to be almost like a parallel track for any leadership program that's running. So if there's not something within a leadership program which is talking to how do we build digital fluency, how do we build technological literacy, how do we understand AI in our workplaces, we should be calling that out. Because effectively, leaders are going to be having to make very considered and justified decisions about the human plus AI workflows that are going to be created. Now, if you don't understand the implications of some of those decisions or some of the judgments that you're making, and the implications might be short-term, medium, or long-term, it's very difficult for people that do have a good understanding and AI fluency and digital literacy to follow you and stand behind what you're saying. So I think it's essential for all leaders to show at this point that they're curious, that they're leaning in, that they are developing themselves alongside whatever else is going on in the organization, and leaning in and being curious about what's going on in the organization, because we're not expecting leaders to develop that technical capability at such an extent that other people within the organization are, but we are expecting them to know what is happening, what is working, and what the implications of that might mean.
I'd add a few things if I could here. So in my discussions with global complex organizations, of course, there's no single standard on what AI tools are used in-house, what external AI tools can be used. There's also no single emerging standard on what are the ethics of leveraging AI both internally and externally. And I don't think that, well, I know that's not what we're really talking about here. Those types of decisions, which tools are available, which are not, how should we use AI, how shouldn't we use AI on an ethical basis, those really have to be made by the organizations and the governing bodies themselves. What Abby, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're talking about and what I believe fully and what Hemsley believes fully is that there's a second part to AI and digital fluency. It's not what are the tools and which buttons do I press? It's how do I leverage AI in my normal leadership practice? For example, as I have to think critically and solve a problem and make a decision, is there a way I can use AI tools, or at which point might I consult an AI tool to help me accelerate that decision? If I am having to tell a story to an external audience or to a large internal audience or to my stakeholders, how can I use AI creatively, graphically, with text to tell that story a bit more quickly and more effectively than I could without that knowledge? So to support pulling the idea of leveraging AI through all of our normal business practices, Hemsley Fraser is just launching a new AI curriculum. Some of the topics are critical thinking with AI, storytelling with AI, productivity with AI, team engagement and team productivity with AI, and also the power of different prompts. So again, there's a difference there between what physical tools should I use. That really needs to be determined by IT security and government governance and your management. But whenever you're looking at leadership for managers, it's not something separate. It's part and parcel of the way we manage. At which point should I think about these tools? How can I leverage these tools to accelerate my human decision making? And I hope that was where you were going, Abby.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, one of the key areas to be thinking about as a leader is, and how am I putting in guardrails, checking, review, and quality assurance guardrails? Because we can all be using and should be leveraging AI tools to, improve our efficiency or productivity, but it's about the checking and the verification. Now, that's going to be the very human determination and where the decisions are made. Is it good enough to go? Yes or no? Now, if you're a leader of people in teams, you might needing to be putting down and making those processes or suggesting how those processes actually work in practice. And if you don't have a good foundational knowledge of how digital and AI is being utilized within your workplace, you can't put those guardrails in place. You can't determine what those processes should be, or if those processes that your team are suggesting are right or wrong, which is why digital and AI fluency becomes very much a capability. This isn't about something you're just going to learn. This is about what you're doing every day, in every moment as a leader, in terms of the questions that you're asking, the conversations that you're having with teams which are using it at a far more advanced level than maybe you are. You should be learning from them. And that's a key kind of takeaway that I think any leader can get behind and lean into. And so then another sort of key focus or key area of change for us, ironically, is change. In the past, we talked about change readiness, so getting ready for any type of change. But I think in conversations, and it's been going on for sort of 12 plus months with many businesses, it's not one change. It's constant change coming from all angles. How do I, as a leader, deal with that myself? But also, how can I prepare and manage my teams to be able to cope with and deal with that whilst going through or still delivering, business as usual activities? And I think that's where the capability really needs to focus on: how can I provide my team clarity? Even when there is uncertainty, how can I give them some certainty? And how do I convey that with conviction and with agency that makes them confident in what I'm telling them and talking to them about as a leader?
So relevant. We have one of our clients, a large global biopharmaceutical, that has just produced, and of course I can't show it. It's their proprietary content, but just produced an internal online handbook on change. And Hemsley Fraser is also, as we speak, evolving our own change management curriculum to focus on exactly this. How does it's not a change curve anymore. It's an infinite change loop that's really happening right now. So what is the mindset for managers to handle continuous change? What are the drivers between all the different human responses to change, and how can managers approach their team members on a human individual level to deal with each? And I think what you said, Abby, the last bit you said was the most important. I personally am not the biggest fan of change, but I've had to, as we all have in this world, in this current workplace, we have to be tolerant and accepting of uncertainty and change. And the question is not how do I get past this change, or how can I pause until I know exactly what's happening to move forward? It's how do I move forward when everything is not and will never be solidified? How do I make the most amount of progress through the change? So you'll see some additional content from Hemsley Fraser coming out for both leaders and staff members in the next month or so, I would think. Thanks, Ed.
Absolutely. And I think very well called for, I'm sure. And it's going to be many clients' requests and conversations that we've, leaned into and listened to over the last few months. When we're going to then quickly look at some of the capabilities which are linked to team or leading, or the we concept, and also the org concept. So we're seeing changes here too, but these are more small evolutions as opposed to big fundamental shifts. So we've gone from building connections and relationships to encouraging connections and collaboration. And I think encouraging connections is really is key terminology, because we're all can be working in quite hybrid, often isolated contexts, and you need to be encouraging people to make those human connections and have those conversations. But you also need to be encouraging people to collaborate across boundaries. So quite often in this complexity, or dealing with, technology, which has got different intersections with different departments or different gatekeepers, we need to be collaborating with people wider and further than we have before. So that's why we've shifted that capability in that way. Now, this is another one, and one's still up for review. Actually, the next two are still up for review. So moving from straightforward conversations to having courageous conversations. And conversations can be difficult. We see this show up day in, day out. So sometimes with clients, and in terms of some of the issues that show up in organizations, so people do need to have courage. I think that's the point, to go into these conversations. They're no longer straightforward conversations. They're dealing with humans and human responses, so that can be messy.
I might add here on this one and on the next one, but I'll start here. I think this might be the most important human skills topic of this decade. We've seen it in the past called crucial confrontations or accountability. But I do agree. We have a client that has renamed all of our challenging conversations workshops into courageous conversations. More than anything else, I think this is where human skills are most required over any other skill. AI is not going to ever give you that personal connection you need to have with a colleague, a manager, or an employee for whom you have to have a very difficult and challenging discussion. When things are complex and stressful, AI is never going to give you that empathy and that active listening. And AI will never provide trust that I'm your manager. I want what's best for you and for this organization. Let's find a way to work on it together. This is the most purely human of all the skills we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I think, having courage is a key capability, just, across the board for a manager. There are many situations that they have to be courageous in, and the conversations often shows up as the most difficult one. And I think if we look then down the generations, that's only going to build with prevalence when we've got, people coming from a different generational set of circumstances, which have had even less human to human conversation than, maybe current generations of leaders have. Moving on to fostering psychological safety, absolutely still a key capability. But now we're thinking about how it lands under what we're calling really umbrella capabilities. So how do we strengthen our team's endurance? And we've played with this one. We're still playing with it. Is it strengthening team resilience, or is it strengthening team endurance, adaptability? I've currently landed on endurance, but because I think there are challenges around calling something about, linked to resilience. Although we all know that we need it, calling it out can be problematic at times.
Well, because it's psychologically unsafe for an adult to admit I am having trouble with resilience, and it even might trigger a flag in some managers if they feel their employees or the employee says they might not be resilient enough. I have another example for another organization that we worked with. We spent months with multiple instructional designers coming up with what we thought we knew to be a really fantastic course on managing your energy, dealing with setbacks, and leading people through those times. And we called it, leading with resilience and enhancing your resilience. The impact was surprising because it was not subscribed to. That workshop, we never had the uptick, the intake that we thought we would have. Because again, as Abby said, admitting you need to be more resilient or seeking information on how to be more resilient felt very, very unsafe. And sometimes everything is in the name. And I think endurance is a good one.
We will see. We'll be interested in any of your views. Please feel free to post them in the chat. Help us decide what the right terminology is on that capability. And then when we look across some of the other organizational focus capabilities, so how do I help drive the organization forward? Again, we're seeing some subtle shifts, I suppose, moving from providing direction, clarity, and structure to making decisions strategically. Now, we did start with strategic decision making because it comes up a lot in terms of what clients are asking for. But strategic decision making might not be as relevant maybe for first line leaders because they're not setting strategy. They're not making the decisions about the strategy. So making decisions strategically really speaks to managers at every level because you can still be a first line leader and the decisions that you're making may well be strategic about how you speak to the team now, how you manage change that's coming. So that felt like it covered and would be more relevant for a wider audience. Delivering sustainable performance, it still needs to be sustainable performance, but we are seeing constant talk around how do we enhance performance. And really to enhance performance, we need to be thinking about some of the other factors around the performance. So how are we making sure that people are all connected to the right purpose? How do we make sure people are motivated and feel like they belong to a team? So it's really not just about giving them focus about their day-to-day. It's also about the conditions that provide the ability for people to be able to elevate their performance and enhance it. So it's not just about actually doing the day-to-day. It's about more than that.
Abby, sorry to interrupt. So you're talking about just even something as fundamental as clarity of mission and vision. There's an analogy I love. You can have the best team, the most technically proficient teams all over your organization, but if they're not all aiming the boat in the exact same direction, you're not going to get anywhere. And if you focus on processes to the exclusion of everything else, that's still not going to help. You can have a team that's more and more and more efficient. But again, if we're not all aligned on the mission, it doesn't matter in the end.
Let's explain the why. Let's get people on board, and let's foster that kind of connection to the why as a team, and like you say, drive or navigate in the same direction. And then moving from creating purposeful agile plans to promoting innovation, experimentation and adaptability. It's too long. We're still playing with this one, but it's definitely around promoting innovation and that experimental mindset. We know that as leaders, it's important to be taking risks, trying things out, learning from what fails, adapting, pivoting, and trying again. And that becomes even more important as we're dealing with some of these shifts in our workplace structures and in how we all navigate, how technology changes our workflows. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour on some of the capabilities. And sometimes, I know we often speak to clients and they say, is this relevant though across all the levels? And I'd say absolutely, but it becomes maybe more focused at certain levels. So if you're at a frontline level, you're really thinking about how maybe it affects your team. At a mid-level, it's really maybe more about how it affects multiple teams. And at a senior level, it's maybe more about how it's affecting the organization more widely. But regardless of the level that you're working at, I think there's got to be something for, leaning in and learning from all levels across the business. So if you are a senior leader, making sure that you are being curious and understanding what is happening at the grassroots, because it's at the grassroots where some of the best insights can be gleaned from, and what's going to help you make better decisions going forward. And you can see there's a really great quote there from London Business School. And I think, and that's something that I think we should be encouraging our leaders to do more and more going forward, especially as maybe they don't have the most technical insights. They can be learning from the people that do, that help them make better human decisions about the changes that will be coming.
With just about 5 minutes to go, why don't we get to the most fun, I think, which is the poll. So here are our 10 revised capabilities. We'd like to ask you, from everything we've discussed, what do you think in your organization, which capability has the biggest room for improvement? So you'll see the answers pop up here on the poll, but let us know, of all of these, where do you want to put your bet, or where would you say the most needs to happen to bring it up to what you would call an effective place? I'm going to before I add some commentary, I'm going to wait and see what we see. It's a pretty even spread, which tells me, to begin with, Abby, I don't know how you feel. With the exception of one, we're seeing votes for all of them, which tells me that these capabilities are generally in the right place. I think what we're seeing here, and we'll just give it a few more seconds, but the winner seems to be, if you can say there is one, is just that having straightforward conversations. And we all know, as learning practitioners, the pain of having and preparing for a difficult conversation is, in the end, much less than the pain of leaving something unsaid, leaving a problem unsolved, leading a team feeling demotivated. And there absolutely are ways to encourage and teach people how to have those great conversations. Wonderful. Abby, what would you add to this?
I'd say, yeah, there is absolutely ways to help people have those conversations, and how do we change people's capabilities, or give them the skills to do that at scale? I think really depends on the situations that they're in. And it's great to see. I think we need to be mindful about how we give people opportunities to develop going forward.
Just one other, oh, I'm sorry, Abby, go ahead.
No, you go.
Just one other comment on this, because we're just about out of time. You have time to finish up. One of the number twos is providing strategic direction. And think about the people who create the strategy, our executive teams, our CEOs. They're living and breathing it. When they say the strategy, when they express it to them, everybody knows it as well as they do. But how often do we, in the trenches, or the people that work with us, feel like we have no idea what's behind the major decisions? I think teaching people how to communicate and over communicate the strategy and our role in it it's showing up as number two here on the poll. I think it's a critical one.
And I think also, and linking to that, making sure that leaders spend the time at all levels to map what that strategy actually means in practice to their team day to day. That's going to help them build the comms which are more relevant, that resonate, and that people can get behind. And I think often as leaders, maybe we're not taking enough time to do that work. Final kind of point in terms of how do we embed these things at scale, all I'm going to say, because I know we're short on time, is before we think about how we develop people's capabilities, think about the moment that they need to be showing up. So at what moment do these issues arise, and how do we best equip the leaders in that moment? So, and this helps us really think about what is the right modality or the mix of methods to actually develop people's capabilities. And we've obviously got many more things at our disposal going forward with new AI tools and resources. But quite often, if people don't know that they need to know something, or if they're at a point of change or transition, or if they're moving into a role, they can't seek out their own development. They need to be guided. So therefore, that might be when teaching it or having a formal program is still useful, as opposed to giving them self-help tools. So it's really understanding, will people seek it out, or do they need to learn how to develop? Do they need to practice the skill? This also helps us differentiate going forward when a program or course is still relevant, as opposed to maybe just providing an AI solution or resource.
Abby, we're at time, so could you please show the slide with all the additional resources that people who would like to know more can get?
So there's a QR code here. Please do scan the QR code and sign up. You'll be able to get up, register to get our latest insights. You'll get access to our evolving framework when we've landed on what those final capabilities should be. And we've also got our brand new 2026 L&D impact survey that we have just completed and compiled a report for. So please do take the time to scan the QR code and sign up to that. And thank you, everybody, for joining
Thank
us
you so
today.
much for the time today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you both, and thank you to our attendees for their participation and for attending this event today. Up next, we have a 15-minute break, and then we'll be joined by Susie Bishop and Sharon Andrews from CLS for their session, Leadership Alignment at Every Level, a Practical Framework. I hope you all stick around for the next session. It will begin at the top of the hour. You can join it by going back to the Zoom events lobby, finding the session and clicking join. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. I'm Emma, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.